And now I got something in my throat. And now I can't drink water. Mm, this is starting out great. Hi, readers. It's Lori. Welcome back to my channel, Books, Ink, and Paper, or welcome if this is your first time. First, I'd like to say to those of you who are regular subscribers and community members and friends and family, I only posted one video last week and I really apologize for that. It was all I had in me. There were a couple of reasons why, including one of us was sick. I had allergies. Lisa was actually sick with something else. And I had some work stuff that needed to be done, and just a lot of stuff got in the way last week. I've also not been able to get back in the groove of filming content in batches, and this weekend was no exception. Our niece was here for a little while. I had some other things that I had to do this weekend. It's just been chaotic. So I'm hoping to get back in the swing and to be able to get back to filming content at one time and getting it, scheduled and posted. Let's just hope. But let's talk about the books I read in March. I read 8 books again in March, which is incredible. And I hope that this sticks for me. I've been really doing well the last few months, and I'm grateful for the way this first quarter started out. And I hope it continues to be this way for the rest of the year. Out of my goal of reading 55 books, I'm 10 books ahead already. So that makes me really, really happy. Like I may really exceed this to a high degree this year. We'll see. I'm going to knock on wood because, you never know. But I'm really pleased with the books that I read for the most part in the month of March, and hopeful that the same occurs in the month of April. So during the month of March, of these 8 books, I read 2,531 pages altogether. That was a good number of pages. My average page count, 75% of my books were between 300 and 499 pages, and just 25% of them were less than 300 pages. So there are a good number of them that were normal size, I guess I would say. I'll be talking about normal size books soon, so stay tuned because that's going to be fun. I read 88% fiction and 13% nonfiction. I definitely need to step up the nonfiction reading, and I'm hoping to be able to do that this month. 75% of them were print and 25% of them were audio, although I did read a couple of them a little bit on a mix of those two, and I also read a few of them with a little bit of an ebook version, but not very much, not enough to change that I was reading it on ebook. And I should be reading more ebooks for a while because I got a new Kindle. My average rating for all of these was 4.13. Top genres were thriller, literary, fantasy, and contemporary. I had a lot of LGBTQIA author representation and a BIPOC author representation. I think there was just one of those. They were by and large medium paced. I had a few that were fast paced, and one I think that was a little slower, that I rated it slow, but for the most part, they were pretty easy to read. So I was really happy with my stats, and I'm really happy with Storygraph. I've been using it now for about, I guess, 4 months, and I really am enjoying it a lot just because it's able to break those things down, and it gives me these pretty little charts and things. So, okay, let's talk about what I read in the month of March. This was an exciting one because I had quite a few 5-star reads. The first book I read and finished in the month of March was The Women by Kristen Hanna. I had gotten this from Book of the Month, I think the month before, and it was really important to me to get to this soon because it's a chunker. This was one of the bigger books that I read. It is 464 pages. But it was very anticipated for me too. I have enjoyed a number of Kristen Hanna novels. Here's what I'm noticing about Kristen Hanna's book, The Women. The hype is high. And sometimes when the hype is high, there's a bit of a backlash. And when people hear about everyone who says, oh, I loved it, and they gush over it, and everybody's giving it 5 stars, and then you pick it up and you're just like, I think your expectations are set to a degree that it really has to push it. It really has to go for you to be able to feel like it's a 5-star read now, because you had really high hopes. You had really high expectations. I think I read it before some of that hype really kicked into high gear. I think the same thing happened with Fourth Wing and some other books that I can't think of at the moment, but I do recall feeling like the hype around Fourth Wing was quite extreme. So I think that that might be what's happened for some people, but I did enjoy this. It wasn't the most well designed writing in terms of depth and in terms of some of what I remember from from The Nightingale, for example. However, it was solid, and the sentence structure was, there was nothing that I felt appalled by, but a lot of people have said they felt like the writing was just really simple. I think that that's probably true, because I think the story in this case is the star of her book. And I dare say, I think that's probably true for all of her books. I'm not sure she focuses so much on the way she writes sentence structures and the way she puts paragraphs together and even dialogue, as much as she writes the story. And I think for me, the story took me away, and I cared about these characters. In particular, the main character, Frankie, who finds herself in this pretty affluent family, and she is trying to navigate this society that her parents really are members of, and also noticing that things are changing around her world, including the fact that her brother was drafted and had to go to the Vietnam War. Her father has a legacy of service in the military and in wartime, which he's very proud of. He has an entire room that's dedicated to these plaques and these medals of people who are in their family that have served. And so it's very important to them that their son has gone to serve. And then they discover that he may have been killed in Vietnam. She ends up enlisting for a number of reasons. And I would say that the synopsis makes you feel as though she goes to Vietnam to find out what happened to her brother. But I would also say that she goes to Vietnam because she knows that her father respects the military, and she thinks that he will respect her choice to go to Vietnam as well. So ultimately, she really decided to join the front line of the Vietnam War to make her father happy and to make him proud of her. And he wasn't. And there were a lot of people that were not proud of these members that served in the Vietnam War. But this is the story of how she enlists and becomes an Army Corps nurse, and meets some other nurses there and some other folks along the way, and how she makes it through this time that she spends in Vietnam. So again, I gave it 5 stars. I did not feel pressured by the hype to do that. I did really genuinely enjoy it. But again, I don't want any of you to feel bad if this wasn't the book for you. I also read my nonfiction pick for the first quarter, which was The Art of Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson. This was a reread for me. This was her revised and updated version, although none of this seemed to be particularly new, except for the fact that she had written some other books since this time when she first published this. And so she added those in as resources, but also this cover is very different. The first time it was based on some photography that she had done. I think maybe her husband did, but don't quote me on that. And it was more of a really beautiful book that had lots of scenic photos and water and different things. Yeah, it was quite something. And I'm pretty sure I still have that somewhere, but nevertheless. So time has passed since I read it the first time. I absolutely read this when I was a new coach. I was new to extreme self-care. I was new to a lot of concepts at that time. And I feel a little bad about that now, because I think, how could you have been new to some of this? But by saying I was new to this, I didn't necessarily know how to tell people no, I wouldn't do something for them or couldn't come to their wedding or something like that. So the art of saying yes was really quite embedded in my psyche. I also didn't necessarily, I don't know, kind of pick apart at that time the fact that she was really writing this to the audience that really had some financial means that maybe they don't all have. And I was reading a review about this after I read it, and I thought, why did that not occur to me the first time? Because it occurred to me this time. So one of the things she talks about is, if you really need some extreme self-care, then you should go get a massage, or you should go and get, manicures and pedicures, and immediately sort of take off and do, or go on trips, or all these kinds of things that not everybody can do. Also, not everybody can eliminate happily some people in their lives if they're kind of toxic. That's a pretty big project, really, for most people. Sometimes people don't want to eliminate people in their lives. They just want to eliminate those behaviors. And I know we can't change anyone, but it's a sticky wicket. And what I think is the challenge with this is she makes it sound just so easy. And yet, she has stories about times in which this wasn't easy for her. In the end, she did talk about bartering for massages and things, but quite honestly, a lot of people don't know how to barter with people for certain things. So I mean, I just think there's some trickiness to it. I think put a limit on toxic people, definitely manage technology, stop the violence, which she considers to be the news. And I will say that Cheryl Richardson is probably the person that convinced me to not watch the news or read the news. And I don't do much of it anymore, but I still see it now and again. She did put little tiny, I don't know if you can see this, little tiny hearts in here from me, like heart confetti. Isn't that something? And I really thought that was very sweet of her. It's falling out all over the place, but there's some good advice in here. This time I gave it 3 stars. I don't remember what I gave it the first time. I don't even know if I was on Goodreads then, but I gave it 3 stars. It was a good read. It was easy, quick, and it was kind of like reconnecting with an old friend, since I used to listen to her podcasts and, read some other books that she'd written, and really was kind of a big follower of hers for a long time. This was so much fun. My friend Andrea, who is on Instagram as Andy Reads a Lot, I think. Andy was at the BookTube Besties Retreat. Andy sent me Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson, which was on my list. So she might have looked at my wish list on Amazon. And I loved this book. It's a graphic novel, middle grade. This is my middle grade read for middle grade March. And it is illustrated and absolutely just the cutest thing. And I gave it 5 stars. I'm not kidding you. I just loved this. It's published by Quill Tree Books. There is another one, and I do plan to get it. And I do plan to read this again and to read it to my grandkids. So cute. So Garlic is a member of this little fresh market group that comes out and sells their wares. And she meets up with Carrot and some other people in the market. And there is a woman who's in charge of the market, and her name is Witch Agnes. How could I not remember that when I have my own Witch Agnes in the house? Sorry, baby. And they're all noticing that there's some smoke coming from the big house, the castle up at the hill, and they're all concerned that the vampires might be back. And so Witch Agnes sends Garlic to go to investigate and see who's in the house. It's just adorable. I can't wait to get to the next one. Truly. Highly recommend. Then I took on the Reading with My Cousins challenge this last month of March, and I finished Louise Penny's Still Life, which is book 1 in the Three Pines series. And I was a little concerned and prepared not to like this so much because people had said they didn't think the first few books were that great, and hoping that I would be enamored enough with it that I would continue the series because I do want to read this. I did want to read this. I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I loved it. I didn't have any trouble with it at all. I liked the characters very, very much, especially Inspector Gamache. This little community of people gets together fairly often, and they have dinners and different things with each other. And they have a dinner at their friend Jane's house one night, and they're all sort of talking about different things. And what's interesting is they've never seen Jane's entire house. They've only ever seen this one area where they get to eat. They can't ever go anywhere else in her house, which is fascinating to me, but also there's something, that later is revealed about that, with foreshadowing a little bit at the beginning. And it's not a spoiler, but I'm going to give you that because I just thought that was, wow. So they find Jane's body in the woods and they call Chief Inspector Armand Gamache to see if he can determine whether or not Jane has been murdered or if this was an accident, because there are a lot of people who hunt in that particular area of Three Pines, and this is set in Canada. And so he brings his team along to investigate this and continues to do so throughout the duration of book one. I enjoyed the characters. I thought they were well developed. They're not all likable, certainly, but he is very likable to me. There's a new detective that he brings on, and so he's trying to manage her expectations and her behavior along the way. He's got a couple other detectives too. Meanwhile, you get to know the people that are members of the community more, and of course, you're in your mind wondering, did this person do it? Did this person do it? And it's centered around art, which of course made me happy too. So the next book I listened to was Anna O by Matthew Blake, and this was my highly anticipated one of them reads for January of this year. I really wanted to listen to this on audio when I found out that they had it on Everand. I wasn't really interested in buying it just because I wasn't sure how I would feel about it, and I'm glad I didn't buy it. This book was hyped pretty highly, and it's about a woman who is found asleep with a number of people who are dead around her, and she's left a note that says something to the effect that I'm sorry, I think I might have killed them. And then she is asleep for a long period of time with no response at all. And a man named Benedict, who is a physician that specializes in sleep disorders, is called into the case to be able to see if he can revive her and find out what happened and whether or not she actually killed these people. It has a number of timelines in it, so it goes back and it shares her perspective of what's happening before all of this occurs. There's also some stuff about Benedict and about his life and his ex-wife and daughter and kind of what his experience is now, and his ex-wife, who's a police officer. So she's interested in what he's discovering about this woman too. 3 stars for me. It didn't meet my expectations of what I thought it would be. I felt like it was probably a third longer than it needed to be. It really dragged in the middle. The ending, I was just kind of left with, really? That's what happened? I don't know, just wasn't for me, but I'm glad I finished it. I buddy read Under the Whispering Door with Berna at Berna's Bookish Adventures. And this was a book that I had purchased a while ago by T.J. Klune after having read The House on the Cerulean Sea. And I really liked the premise of this book and thought that it would be one that I would enjoy. I absolutely loved this book. I more than enjoyed it. I loved it much more than I loved The House on the Cerulean Sea. There are some references, just slightly, like the word cerulean is used more than once, and the sea and different things. So Karen's Crossing is a place where people are transitioning from life to death and what's beyond. So it starts out with this man named Wallace Price, who is at his own funeral, and he's realizing that he's dead, but he doesn't feel dead and he doesn't want to be dead, and he's really kind of surly about that. He's kind of a curmudgeon-y guy, has been for a long time, very focused on work, not a great people person, and there aren't a lot of people at his funeral, and to be quite honest, they don't seem to be particularly sad that Wallace has departed the earth. But then there is this woman that shows up and says that she is the person that is supposed to take him to the next phase of his death. And so her name is maybe M-E-I, I don't know. And she takes him to this place called Karen's Crossing, which is a tea shop. And that is where he meets Hugo, who is in charge of helping Wallace transition to wherever it is that Wallace goes. There are some other people in this tea shop and some customers that come regularly to this tea shop, but I don't want to say a whole lot more than this, except to say that Wallace is able to reflect on his life, as many people do as they are approaching death, or perhaps that's what they do when they die. I'd like to think that they do. He's really trying to understand some of the choices that he made and look at some of the relationships that he had and I cried for like an hour after I read this book. I'm not even kidding you. I was sobbing toward the end. I just, and Berna was crying too. Like we had this all laid out. We were going to read a couple, 2 to 3 chapters a day. We were doing great. And then we got to a certain point. We were both like, we're going to finish this weekend. And we did. It was really easy to read, short chapters. If this isn't my favorite of his, if something else bumps this one out, I'll be very surprised, but I just loved it. I just loved it. A lot of people said that they felt like some of the choices that he made with the characters were not choices that they would have liked. And he does talk about in the acknowledgments what led him to write this book. I didn't have any problem with the choices he made, but I do understand that some people would. This also has queer characters, so queer representation. And of course, TJ Klune is a queer author. Another book I read for my cousin, read like my cousin's concept is The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd. This one took me a little bit longer, but not because I wasn't enjoying it. I was just reading a number of things at the same time, so I kept getting distracted by those things. This one was pretty small print too. This is the first time I've ever read anything by Peng Shepherd, and this is a little bit of magical realism or fantasy. So I had a little bit of fantasy here. This one definitely had some, it took a turn that really shocked and surprised me, and I'm happy with the turn it took, really. So Cartographers starts out by introducing you to Nell, whose passion is cartography. She's grown up with her father being a cartographer and working for the New York Public Library. She had worked at the library as well with her dad for a long time. And they were fine until one day they got in an argument about one particular map, and they never spoke again for the longest time. She went on to take another job that was very much less dignified in her mind, but it had to do with maps. And so she'd been carrying on not speaking to her dad for a really, really long time. And then her dad is found dead in the library. And the map that he was upset about is in kind of this whole setting of this book. The map is its own character, truly, and the adventures of the map over time. So this goes back and forth from the past to the current daytime. Lots of characters involved and lots of places that you are become familiar with. And I really, really enjoyed this. I don't want to spoil anything, but as Krista said when we were talking one night in a kind of a chat book, one of her Patreon chats, she said, it took a turn. And I it did take a turn. And we were both surprised by that because I wasn't really expecting that turn. And she said, but I liked it. And I did too. I gave this 4 stars, and I would read something else by Peng Shepherd for sure. It says it's an enjoyable, fast-paced, and fantastical thriller. Yes, it is. It's very fast-paced, and I appreciated that. And then the last one is When All Is Said by Anne Griffin. This one I had gotten wind of on a podcast, and I found it on both Kindle Unlimited, and I found access to listen to it, I think, at my library. And so I had really high hopes about When All Is Said because it had a great sort of premise to it. And this was the story of Maurice Hannigan, who on a night in June goes to a place that he's familiar with, and he has the woman in this bar restaurant set up a number of different drinks, and each time he has this different drink, he tells a story about his life and some people in it. And he kind of recounts some of the experiences in his life that carry more weight or meaning for him in some way or another. Some of them are things that happened to him. Some of them are things that he chose to do. It involves other people in his life. And essentially it is a series of stories that he's telling his son. So my first impression of this when I read the synopsis is that he's sharing these stories with people in the bar. And in fact, he's not. In fact, I don't even know that there's anybody near him in the bar. He's really just telling these stories in his head to his son, I guess, just kind of reminiscing and in some cases ruminating a little about the past and some of the things that happened that really impacted him in a strong way, good or bad. I did really enjoy this. I Will say I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was well written. I thought it was pretty well paced. Each chapter is a different story, so the chapters are long. I sort of like that they had some continuity, but they all had their own little story, and I really enjoyed that. The way that the author wrapped this up was really what prevented me from going a little bit higher than 4 stars. And I know she has a choice in the way that she ends a book, but I just wasn't expecting that, and I would have preferred something else. This one has some sensitivity warnings that are pretty significant. Death, miscarriage, physical abuse, suicide, suicidal thoughts, and child death. I just want you to know there's some dark stuff in here. Likewise, there's some sensitivity warnings in the women as well. The sensitivity warnings for the women are addiction, alcoholism, and child abuse. The sensitivity warnings for the under the whispering door are death, grief, and suicide there as well. Child death, death of a parent, and murder. So that is my wrap up of the books that I read this month in March. I enjoyed pretty much all of these books to some degree. I enjoyed them all. And yeah, I can't wait to hear what you read in March or what you've thought about any of these. And I think I told you this in my haul, I was so delighted by Still Life that I bought book 2. So I don't know when I'm going to get to that, but probably soon because I don't want to lose the continuity there. And I'm really looking forward to another buddy read with Berna for another TJ Klune book this summer. So stay tuned for that. And I do plan on getting the next book in this series. They prompted me to look at some more by these authors, which is always a good sign, right? So thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks for your patience as I try to wrap up this content for March and then move into some new content for April. Happy April to all of you. And as always, happy reading. Bye.